and I am a professor of politics and government at the University of Puget Sound.
Okay, so my first question for you, what are the immediate impacts of this attack by the US?
Well, it's a little early to say. The United States is reporting that the Iranian nuclear program has been severely degraded. I think the president said that or somebody in the administration said that the Fordo enrichment site has been taken off the table. And that was the target. The target was the degradation of Iran's ability to enrich uranium up to the levels that they would need to actually assemble a nuclear bomb. So while it's early and I don't know that we know for 100% sure how successful those strikes were with satellites and other mechanisms, I think we can be at least reasonably confident that the United States was relatively successful. And I think we would measure success sort of in terms of how long the Iranian program has been set back, right? So if you take yesterday as a benchmark, how long would it take them to get back to that level of enriched uranium, right? Are we talking a few weeks, a few months, a few years? So I think that's how we would measure success.
And then how would you say this changes the diplomatic situation between Israel, Iran, the US, and just other countries that may be getting involved?
Well, I think it is certainly going to make it harder for any future negotiations. The president, 2 or 3 days ago, had said that he would make a decision about airstrikes within 2 weeks. 2 days, I guess, is technically within 2 weeks. It's sort of in the letter of the law there, but it's certainly not within the spirit. I think, saying that he's going to make a decision within 2 weeks sort of, I think, is intended to reassure Iran that there's at least going to be some time period in which the president is still open to negotiations. Last night in the press conference, the President Trump said, in fact, the whole thing was sort of a smokescreen, that it was designed to provide operational security. Well, that is really going to undermine anyone's ability to trust the United States in future negotiations. Unpredictability is desirable in certain kinds of situations, and in other situations, you really need predictability. Other sides have to be able to trust you. If you're negotiating, how is anybody now going to trust the United States and President Trump in particular if he's setting out timelines or making promises about things? So I think it is going to make the possibility of negotiations really difficult. Iran is now in a really problematic position, I think. Um, Ironically, I think that there's a better chance of negotiations going forward if the strikes were not entirely successful. If Iran still has something to offer, getting back under international inspections, then I think that makes it a little bit easier because they'll have something to sort of offer to the United States. Hey, you didn't completely take out our enrichment facilities, so let's get back to the negotiating table. If the strikes were as successful as the United States is suggesting, I think then Iran is really in a position where there's not much to negotiate anymore, and really the only thing left to do is decide when and if and when to retaliate.
Yeah, do you see this resolving diplomatically, or do you think there's a chance at this point after this US attack?
Again, I think it's going to depend on how much damage the United States did. And so I don't think we can really say yet. It's going to be very difficult for Iran to come back to the table. I think one way to think about this is that all regimes have to maintain a sort of a level of sort of honor and dignity and respect with their various constituencies. In a democracy, obviously, to a large degree, that's the people. In an autocracy like Iran, it's not necessarily the people, but it might be the Revolutionary Guard. It might be other religious officials, right? People who are looking to the current administration, the current theocratic regime, and if they fail to respond in some way, it makes them look weak. It makes people doubt their ability. So Iran has to really sort of figure this out. I think it's going to be very, very difficult for them to not respond with some kind of military force. And it's going to be even harder for them, I think, to come back to the negotiating table after I think they not incorrectly feel like they've sort of been tricked.
And you just mentioned Iran is in a pretty difficult situation right now. What are their options for a response?
Well, they have options. The question is whether or not they actually want to use them. I think there are three sort of primary, or maybe four. Their primary options would be missile attacks against American bases in the region, which they've done before. They did in response to the killing of General Soleimani by President Trump in his first administration. That would be, I think, the first and probably the most likely response from Iran. Their other responses would be to go after the oil market, the oil economy, either by trying to shut off the Straits of Hormuz, either by mining them or by sinking a ship to block transit through the Straits of Hormuz, or to target Saudi or maybe Kuwaiti or other countries' oil fields directly with missile attacks or drone strikes. And then finally, I think this is maybe the least likely. In the past, Iran, of course, used various proxies around the world to sort of do its foreign policy, commit terrorist attacks and things like that. That's obviously a little bit harder. Israel has wiped or essentially really degraded Hezbollah's capabilities. The Houthis can't do much, but again, they could target shipping through the Red Sea. Um, I don't think Iran has invested time in building networks in the United States. So I think, at least in the short term, it's unlikely that we're going to see Iranian assets trying to commit terror attacks inside the United States. Now, the question, so they have all those possible responses. The problem is, all those are kind of escalatory at this point, and Iran really doesn't have, I think, room to gamble here. Their air defenses have been completely wiped out by Israel. So anything they do other than a token response risks the targeting of the political regime by either Israel or the United States, right? So far, Israel has primarily targeted the military and the nuclear program. They have not gone after the Ayatollah Khamenei. They have not gone after the political leadership. So Iran has to really calibrate what can they do with that sort of is a response to sort of maintain their position, but that is not going to sort of start an escalatory spiral that potentially leads to the targeting of the political regime. That's going to be a really, really difficult needle to thread, and I'm not sure. I don't really know how they're going to do it.
And then what was the US's position in this conflict before the attack, and how has that changed now since the attack?
Well, so before the attack, of course, the United States was involved in negotiations to try to put an agreement together, something that presumably looked like the agreement that the Obama administration had reached with Iran to limit Iranian enrichment to relatively low levels that could not be used for a nuclear weapon. Um, Now the president is telling us that at least by the end, those negotiations were not serious. So I assume that now the United States' entire position has changed. For a very long time, the United States has been willing to allow Iran to enrich uranium. At the press conference this morning, Marco Rubio said that, again, the United States would allow Iran to maintain a civilian nuclear program, but not to enrich to any kind of significant levels. So I think now that that position has sort of solidified, the United States is now, I think, at least under the Trump administration, committed to not allowing Iran the possibility of enriching to anything above 3 or 4%, what you would need for a civilian nuclear program. I think that's where the United States is now, that it's just not going to allow Iran to get anywhere up to 20 or 60% enriched uranium.
And then a big topic after this attack has been President Trump's powers under war. So Senator Jeff Merkley, he said that Trump violated the Constitution by not getting
Mhm.
congressional approval. I know Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is saying that Trump should be impeached. So what's your take on that? Did Donald Trump violate the Constitution with these strikes?
No. Um, the Constitution gives the power to declare war to Congress, but it doesn't define what war is. And so a lot of scholars, there's a lot of legal argument about this. What constitutes war to the point where Congress actually has to declare war, right? In the history of the United States has used military force somewhere, depends how exactly you count, but something around 250 times. It's only formally declared war in five conflicts, the most recent of which was World War II. Congress has authorized presidents to use force in other contexts, like the invasion of Afghanistan, the invasion of Iraq, were done under different kinds of congressional authorizations. But there have been a large number of uses of force that have not involved any congressional authorization at all. That is done under what we would call the inherent authority of the president. Um, the Constitution vests the president as commander in chief of the armed forces. It gives him the power to conduct foreign policy as we understand it. And those things then are used as a justification for the president to use force without congressional authority. I think many people would say that limited airstrikes, one night, a couple of airstrikes against three targets, falls well below the threshold of war that would require a congressional authorization. Generally, when presidents are going to be conducting long, protracted uses of force, they are going to want some kind of congressional buy-in, if not only because at some point they're going to need more money from Congress to do these to conduct whatever they're doing. So if the United States is going to get involved in protracted airstrikes over the course of weeks, I would expect the president to go to Congress to ask for some kind of authorization. If this is all we see, what happened last night, then he hasn't asked Congress, and I don't see that. And I think most legal scholars don't see that as a violation of the Constitution.
Yeah, and then some Democrats, they're calling for a bill that would restrict President Trump's powers during war. Do you see this realistically passing Congress or having a chance to pass?
No, I mean, I think first of all, of course, the Republicans are still in control of both the House and the Senate, and I think it is incredibly unlikely that Republicans are going to vote to limit the power of the president. There are some Republicans who are critical of unilateral uses of force by the executive branch. I don't think that there's enough to get it through either House of Congress. And even if they did, there are questions as to whether or not those kinds of things are constitutional. So, the history of American use of force, especially over the last 70 years or so, really gives the president a wide latitude to use limited force without congressional authorization. Again, I think if we're going to see anything that grows into a protracted conflict at that point, if only again to get funding, the president would have to go to Congress. But if we're not looking at more airstrikes or anything more serious than that, then no, I think that we're not going to see any kind of bill coming out of Congress. We're not going to see the president asking Congress for authorization or anything like that.
And then how are other world leaders reacting to this attack? I know that Russia has already condemned the attack.
Mhm.
Kind of what does this mean for the world stage?
Well, in general, uses of force are understood by the international community to be illegal unless they are prompted by self-defense or authorized by a UN resolution. And I don't think anybody would argue that this was either of those things. On the other hand, I think a lot of countries, Iran, look at Iran as a significant threat. I think even though Russia has criticized the attack, Russia has been very nervous about the possibility of an Iranian nuclear bomb. So I don't think they're particularly upset that the United States did this. Um, Iran is seen by a lot of countries as an unstable actor. I don't mean unstable internally. I mean unstable in sort of a regional sense, right? They project power beyond their borders. They destabilize regimes like Lebanon, like Syria. They've caused all sorts of problems in the broader region. And Iran with a nuclear weapon would be even more of a problem. So I think regardless of I think you're going to get sort of token condemnation from people because international law was broken and sort of the norms of the use of force are seen as something that states want to uphold. But I think really most people, most world leaders, most other countries are going to be pretty happy with this outcome.
And then do you see this possibly having any impact on Israel's war with Gaza right now, just since Iran backs Hamas? Iran's
I
pretty
don't think
weakened
it
from
changes
this.
much there. As once basically Hezbollah was taken off the table by Israel, Iran's ability to influence what was going on in Gaza really sort of dissipated. The only way I think that this really could affect Gaza is if it, in fact, means that it's even less likely that the United States is going to use any leverage on Israel to try to stop attacks or to try to move to some kind of negotiated settlement. And I don't know that that's going to happen. I think that this is sort of, even though it's Israel, I think it's really not directly connected to Gaza. Iran did support Hamas and was involved to some degree in sort of the planning of the October 7th attacks, but I don't see these things being related in that kind of way.